I never imagined my name would end up whispered in a neighborhood that didn't even exist a year earlier. Yet there I was, standing at the edge of a freshly paved road, staring at a neat row of mailboxes lined up like soldiers, each one planted firmly on land I had owned since my father passed it down to me. 35 homes, 35 families, and not a single permission slip, signature, or warning that any of this was coming. The first thing I felt wasn't anger. It was disbelief, the kind that makes your ears ring and your thoughts slow down, like your mind is refusing to accept what your eyes are clearly seeing. Kids were riding bikes where my cattle once grazed. Sprinklers clicked on and off in perfect rhythm, watering lawns that had replaced my land. A woman waved at me from her porch, smiling politely, as if I were just another neighbor passing by. I nodded back, even though my stomach was tight. This wasn't just property. This land held memories. My father teaching me how to measure water levels near the old dam. My mother sitting under the oak tree that had somehow survived the construction. Every inch of this place mattered. And now an HOA had decided it mattered more to them. I went home that night and spread the paperwork across my kitchen table. Deeds, survey maps, old photographs with dates written on the back. The truth was clear and uncomfortable. The homeowners association had either made a massive mistake or assumed I wouldn't fight back. Maybe they thought I was gone for good. Maybe they thought the land was forgotten. They were wrong. What made it harder was the people. These weren't villains. They were families who had bought into a dream. Safe streets, clean sidewalks, promise of community. None of them knew they were living on someone else's land. And the HOA? They spoke in emails full of legal language and calm reassurance, telling me the issue would be reviewed. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into silence. Meanwhile, construction trucks came and went. Fences went up. Property lines were redrawn without my consent. Every time I drove past, it felt like watching someone slowly erase your past with a smile. At the far end of the property sat the dam. Old, solid, built decades ago to control water flow during heavy rains. It had always been a quiet presence, almost forgotten, but still very much functional. My father used to say, "Water doesn't ask who owns the land. It only listens to what you let through." That sentence echoed in my head more than I like to admit. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for justice. But the more doors that closed, the more pressure I felt building inside me. Lawyers spoke carefully. The HOA spoke confidently. And the families kept living their lives, unaware of the ticking clock beneath their feet. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, I found myself standing at the dam again. The metal lever was cold under my palm. Water pressed behind the gate, patient and heavy, waiting for a decision. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the distant sounds of laughter drifting up from the houses below, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. I didn't pull the lever that night. I let my hand fall away and walked back to my truck, but the weight of it followed me home. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw blue rooftops and white fences sitting where my childhood once lived. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How does something like this happen without anyone stopping it? The answer, it turned out, stretched back years. After my father died, I left town for work. Just a few years, I told myself. The land stayed in my name, the taxes paid on time. The dam inspected every season like clockwork. But while I was gone, the area changed. The county expanded. Zoning maps shifted. Developers circled like they always do, looking for quiet land with no loud owner standing on it. Somewhere in that process, my property became a blank space on someone else's plan. The HOA documents I eventually got my hands on told a careful story. According to them, the land had been acquired through due process. According to my records, that was impossible. My deed was clean. The boundaries were clear. Even the survey markers were still there, buried under fresh sod and decorative rocks. Two versions of reality existed, and both sides claimed the law. What made it worse was how polite everyone was. The HOA president invited me to a meeting. A folding table, bottled water, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. They spoke about community values and long-term vision, about how disruptive legal action could be for families who had invested their savings. When I mentioned the dam, the room went quiet for half a second too long. Someone changed the subject. That's when I knew they were aware of it. The dam wasn't just a structure. It controlled runoff from higher ground, protecting the land below during heavy rains. It had been designed before any homes were there, before sidewalks and basements and landscaped yards. It was never meant to serve a neighborhood. And yet, without consulting me, they had built one anyway. I started noticing small things. Drainage channels rerouted. Warning signs removed. New maps that didn't show the dam at all. Felt less like a mistake and more like a gamble. A quiet hope that nothing would go wrong. That I wouldn't push back. Then there were the people. The woman who waved at me that first day, her name was Emily. I learned it by accident when her package was delivered to my old mailbox by mistake. She apologized 3 times, embarrassed, friendly, unaware. She talked about how lucky they felt to find the place, how safe it was, how the HOA promised everything was handled. I smiled and nodded, my chest tight. Every conversation like that made the situation heavier. This wasn't just about land ownership anymore. It was about consequences. About how far a corporation could go before someone snapped. About how responsibility gets blurred when too many signatures pass across too many desks. My lawyer warned me to be patient, to let the courts work. The HOA's lawyer warned me to stop interfering with established development. Both sides spoke in calm voices, but underneath it all, pressure kept building. Deadlines, notices, subtle threats, and always, in the back of my mind, the dam waited. Each time it rained, I checked the levels. Each time the water rose, I wondered what would happen if the system was forced to do what it was originally built for. Not out of anger, but out of inevitability. You can ignore reality for only so long before it makes itself known. One afternoon, I found fresh concrete poured dangerously close to the spillway. No warning tape, no permits posted. Just progress marching forward without looking back. I stood there, rain starting to fall, realizing that someone had decided the risk was worth it. Standing in the drizzle, watching the water collect, I understood something that unsettled me deeply. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a countdown, and whether I wanted it or not, every choice I made from that moment on was pulling me closer to the same question. What happens when the truth finally pushes back? The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, slipping into my days in ways that were easy to ignore at first. A letter taped to my gate warning me not to trespass on community property. A survey crew marking lines that cut straight through land I had walked since childhood. Friendly smiles that slowly turned cautious once people realized I wasn't going away. The HOA began moving faster. Too fast. They announced a community event by the retention pond, calling it a water feature, complete with benches and decorative stones. I stood at the edge during setup, watching workers drill into soil that used to absorb runoff naturally. One of them glanced at me and said quietly, "They told us this area never floods." The way he said it made me wonder if he believed it himself. Emily stopped waving after that. Instead, she approached me one evening as I was checking the water levels. Her voice was soft, careful, like she didn't want to choose a side. She asked if the rumors were true, if the neighborhood was really built on disputed land. I told her the truth without drama, without threats. I showed her an old photo of my father standing near the dam, dated decades before the first permit the HOA claimed to have. She didn't know what to say. She just stared at the picture, then back at the houses behind her. "They promised us everything was safe," she whispered. That word stuck with me. Safe. Behind the scenes, another story was unfolding. I found out the developer who originally planned the project had quietly sold their stake once construction began. The responsibility passed to the HOA, which passed it to subcontractors, which passed it to insurance policies filled with fine print. No single person was fully accountable anymore. Just layers, buffers, distance. My lawyer noticed it too. He said it felt like everyone was hoping the issue would resolve itself without anyone having to admit fault. That I'd get tired. That the courts would move slowly. That the weather would cooperate. I started questioning myself in ways I hadn't expected. Was I being stubborn? Was I holding on to the past at the expense of people who had nothing to do with the decision? Late at night, those doubts were loud. I remembered my father's voice, steady and calm, telling me to protect what was ours, but also to understand the weight of doing so. The dam inspections became more frequent. Not official ones, curious ones. HOA representatives driving by, stopping just long enough to look concerned, then leaving. Once, I caught someone photographing the spillway from a distance. When I asked who sent them, they said they were just documenting. Documenting what? The weather reports started to change. A heavier than usual storm system forming upstream. Nothing alarming, according to the forecasts, but enough to make me check the old logs my father kept. Pages filled with dates, measurements, notes in his handwriting. He had underlined certain levels in red. Levels the water hadn't reached in years. I noticed new drainage grates installed overnight near the lowest houses. Temporary ones. Rushed. As if someone finally realized what they had built over but didn't want to say it out loud. No community announcement. No warnings. Just quiet adjustments. Emily called me one night. She didn't say much. Just asked if I thought they should leave for a few days if the rain came. I wanted to answer honestly. I wanted to tell her everything. But I also knew that fear spreads faster than facts. So I told her to stay alert. To trust her instincts. After I hung up, I sat alone in the dark, realizing how tangled everything had become. Every option in front of me carried a cost. Action or inaction. Silence or confrontation. The land. The people. The truth sitting between them like a fault line. Outside, the wind picked up. Clouds rolled in low and heavy, pressing down on the hills. Somewhere beyond the trees, water was already moving, following paths it had known long before houses and HOAs and promises. And standing there, listening to the first distant rumble of thunder, I had the unsettling feeling that decisions were being made on my behalf, by the weather, by the past, by people who assumed I would stay quiet. They had no idea how close everything was to changing. The rain started earlier than expected. At first it was light, almost polite, tapping against the windshield as I drove toward the dam. Then it thickened. Drops turned heavy, relentless, drumming faster, louder. The sky pressed low, gray and swollen, as if it had been holding something back for too long. I parked and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled like wet earth and metal. Water was already moving faster than it had the day before, slipping through channels, gathering speed. I checked the gauge. Higher. Not critical yet, but close enough to make my chest tighten. My phone buzzed. An email from the HOA. Subject line: immediate concern regarding water control structure. No greeting. No signature. Just a paragraph of carefully chosen words asking me to refrain from any actions involving the dam until further notice. As if I had ever agreed to let them decide that. As if the dam wasn't mine. Another message followed. Then another. They knew. I drove down toward the neighborhood. Streets glistened under the rain. Porch lights flicked on even though it was still afternoon. People moved quickly now, pulling trash bins closer, glancing up at the sky instead of at each other. The calm, curated feeling of the place was cracking. At the entrance, a temporary sign had been posted. Potential weather advisory. No details. No explanation. Just enough to say they had acknowledged something without admitting what it was. Emily was outside when I passed her house. She stood barefoot on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, eyes fixed on the slope behind the homes. When she saw me, she hesitated, then stepped forward into the rain. "They told us not to worry," she said, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the water. "They said everything's under control." I didn't answer right away. I looked past her at the ground, at how dark it had become, saturated. "Did they mention the dam?" I asked. She shook her head. That was answer enough. A low rumble rolled through the distance. thunder or something heavier. Hard to tell. The wind shifted, pushing rain sideways now, sharp against my face. I felt eyes on me from behind curtains, from inside cars slowing as they passed. Word had spread, even if the truth hadn't. Back at the dam, the level rose inch by inch. Steady, patient. The spillway groaned softly, a sound I hadn't heard since I was a kid. I ran my hand along the concrete, slick with water, remembering my father's warnings. How he'd say that structures like this don't fail all at once. They warn you first. Headlights appeared behind me. 2 vehicles. One marked, one not. The HOA president stepped out under an umbrella, shoes already sinking into the mud. A city official followed, pale and tight-lipped. They spoke quickly, all at once, voices clipped, urgent. They asked me what I planned to do. I asked them why they built 35 homes without acknowledging what sat upstream. Silence. The rain filled the gap. They talked about liability, about emergency protocols, about how this wasn't the time for arguments. They said the situation could escalate if I didn't cooperate. They said people were scared. So am I said. Another thunderclap. Closer this time. The water surged against the gate. Harder now, no longer subtle. I checked the gauge again. Past one of the red marks from my father's logbook. Emily's name flashed on my phone. I didn't answer. Somewhere downhill, a siren wailed briefly, then cut off. The official glanced at his watch. The HOA president wiped rain from her face. Mascara streaking now, control slipping. We need a decision, she said. I looked at the lever. Rusted, heavy, solid, built to move when it had to. The rain came down in sheets now, drowning out everything else. The neighborhood lights flickered in the distance. Once, twice, I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal and waited. I was about to speak when the city official's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then at me, then back at the HOA president. His face drained of color. What is it? She asked. He hesitated, just long enough to matter. We just received an internal report, he said carefully, from county records. The rain kept pounding, but suddenly everything felt too quiet. There was a filing, he continued, lowering his voice, 6 months before construction began. An environmental exception request. It mentions the dam. Explicitly. My grip tightened on the lever. The HOA president shook her head immediately. That's not possible. We were told. You were told what you needed to be told. The official cut in sharper now. The developer submitted it. They flagged the flood control structure and the risks of downstream development. The request was denied. Denied. The word hit harder than the thunder. And yet, I said slowly, you built anyway. The HOA president's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted not to me, but to the neighborhood below, to the lights, to the people inside those homes. We didn't see that report, she said. It was never forwarded to us. The official let out a short, humorless laugh. Because it was pulled, quietly, marked inactive. Someone buried it. A betrayal, then. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A choice. My phone buzzed again. Emily. This time I answered. They're telling us to evacuate the lower block, she said, breathless. But only a few houses. No one knows why. People are arguing. Someone said the HOA knew about flooding years ago. I closed my eyes. Behind me the dam shuddered. Just slightly. Enough to feel. The official stepped closer. If that gate fails under pressure, he said, voice tight, no one controls how fast or where the water goes. And if I open it, I replied, at least the flow is managed, like it was designed to be. No one answered that, because they all knew it was true. Down in the neighborhood, chaos bloomed in pockets. Porch lights flicked on and off as doors opened. Cars started. People shouted names into the rain. Some listened to the evacuation notice. Others refused, trusting the promises they'd been given. Emily stayed on the line. I could hear a child crying in the background. They're saying it's just a precaution, she said. But no one's explaining anything. At the dam, the HOA president's composure finally cracked. "If you do this," she said, voice shaking, "you'll destroy everything." I looked at her, really looked, at the fear, at the guilt buried under years of confident emails and polished meetings. "No," I said quietly. "You already did." Another message came through, this one from my lawyer. Short, urgent. They found proof. Emails, signatures. The developer warned them. The HOA board voted to proceed anyway. They assumed the dam would never be used, that I'd never come back. The water surged again, higher now, testing the gate. This wasn't theoretical anymore. The choice was no longer between right and wrong, but between controlled damage and uncontrollable disaster. Emily whispered my name through the phone. "Please," she said, "just tell me what to do." I looked downhill, at the homes glowing softly through the rain, at families making decisions with half the information, at a problem years in the making, finally demanding an answer. The official spoke again, almost pleading. "If you're going to act," he said, "it has to be now." The lever trembled under my hand, vibrating with the force behind it. Somewhere a transformer popped. The lights flickered again, then steadied. I took a breath, and the water kept rising. I didn't make a speech. I didn't look for permission. I simply nodded once, more to myself than to anyone else, and pulled. The lever resisted at first, metal grinding against years of rust and neglect. My shoulders burned as I leaned into it, rain soaking through my jacket, water roaring louder with every inch the gate shifted. Then it gave way. Not suddenly, not violently, just enough. The dam responded the way it always had. Water surged forward in a controlled release, spilling into channels my father had carved and reinforced decades earlier. It moved fast, but it moved where it was meant to, down the old paths, away from the lowest homes, away from the weakest ground. Below us, sirens grew louder. This time they didn't stop. The city official was already on the phone, shouting coordinates, redirecting emergency crews. The HOA president stood frozen, watching the flow she had pretended didn't exist finally make itself known. Her umbrella slipped from her hand. Forgotten. I stayed where I was, hands still on the lever, adjusting it in small increments as the pressure changed. This wasn't revenge. This was maintenance. This was what the dam was built for, what it had always waited to do. Minutes stretched, then more. The rain didn't let up, but the panic below began to shift. Streets flooded in some areas, but not catastrophically. Basements stayed dry where they should have flooded. Water rushed through drainage routes that hadn't been mapped on any HOA plan but were etched into the land itself. Emily called again. Her voice was shaking, but steadier now. "They moved us uphill," she said. "They're saying it was because of old infrastructure. They didn't explain, but thank you. I don't know what you did, but thank you." I closed my eyes, just for a second. When the storm finally began to weaken, the dam settled into a steady, manageable flow. The danger line dropped below the red marks in my father's logbook. I eased the lever back, locking it into place, feeling the vibration fade beneath my palms. Silence followed. Heavy. Earned. By morning, the truth was everywhere. Emails leaked. Meeting notes surfaced. A vote buried deep in HOA records, approving construction despite documented flood risks, despite explicit warnings. The developer's signature was there. So were theirs. The story shifted overnight, from a land dispute to a scandal. The HOA president resigned before noon. The city issued a formal statement acknowledging critical oversight failures. An investigation was announced. The neighborhood woke up to news vans instead of lawn sprinklers. And then came the twist no one expected. Buried in the county archive was an addendum to my father's original dam permit. A clause few had noticed, but one he had insisted on including. In cases of imminent risk caused by downstream development, operational control of the dam defaulted entirely to the landowner, me. No HOA authority. No city override. He had anticipated this. Planned for it. When my lawyer read it out loud, I laughed. Not out of joy, out of awe. My father had never trusted short-term thinking. The lawsuits came, of course, but they didn't come for me. They went after the HOA board, the developer, the insurers who signed off without reading closely enough. Settlements followed, then buyouts. Some families left. Others stayed, wiser now, more cautious. The land around the dam was rezoned as protected. No more construction. No more pretending. Weeks later, Emily stopped by. She didn't bring documents or questions. Just coffee. We stood quietly, watching water move the way it always had. "I guess some things can't be ignored forever," she said. I nodded. That night, I walked back to the dam alone. The rain had washed it clean, leaving the concrete lighter, almost new. I rested my hand on the lever one last time, feeling nothing but cool, steady metal. My father had been right. Water doesn't ask who owns the land, but it remembers who respects it. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, as if the land itself was finally able to breathe again. Crews came and went, not to build but to measure, document, and restore. Temporary fences marked new boundaries. Official notices replaced the glossy HOA flyers that once promised perfection. Life didn't snap back to normal. It settled into something more honest. The investigations answered questions people were afraid to ask out loud. Who approved the construction? Why were the warnings ignored? How did 35 homes rise on land that was never meant to hold them? The answers weren't simple, but they were clear enough. Shortcuts were taken. Risks were minimized on paper. Responsibility was diluted until no one felt fully accountable. And yet, accountability arrived anyway. The HOA dissolved and reformed under new leadership. The word association started to sound less like authority and more like obligation. Insurance covered what it could. Buyouts gave families options. Some chose to leave, chasing peace elsewhere. Others stayed, determined to rebuild trust, not just structures. Emily stayed. We didn't talk about the dam much after that. We talked about smaller things. About how different the neighborhood felt without pretending nothing had happened. About how strange it was to realize that safety isn't something you're sold. It's something you maintain. Sometimes painfully. She told me her son still asked questions about the storm. About the night the lights flickered and adults whispered instead of laughed. She didn't lie to him. She said people made mistakes, and someone else had to be brave enough to fix them. That word, brave, made me uncomfortable. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. I felt lucky that my father had thought far enough ahead to protect something he knew might one day be challenged. If anything, I felt like a caretaker who showed up when he was needed. The land changed too. Grass grew back in places that had been scraped bare. Water moved more freely once the drainage was corrected. The dam became visible again on county maps, no longer erased by convenience. School groups even came by once, learning how flood control works, how old infrastructure still matters in a modern world. Sometimes I'd catch people looking at me differently when I drove past. Not with fear, not with suspicion, with curiosity, with the quiet realization that systems only work when someone is willing to stand in front of them and say no. Late one afternoon, I returned to the dam as the sun dipped low, turning the water gold. The lever sat where it always had, steady and silent. I thought about how close everything came to tipping the wrong way. About how easily truth can be buried until pressure forces it back to the surface. I understood then that this story was never really about revenge or victory. It was about boundaries, about memory, about what happens when progress forgets to listen to the ground it's built on. Before I left, I paused, resting my hand on the cool concrete, and remembered my father's voice one last time. Calm, certain. Respect the land, he used to say. It remembers every choice you make. If the story made you think, if it stirred something about fairness, responsibility, or standing up when it would be easier to stay quiet, then don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Ask questions where you live. And if you believe stories like this matter, take a moment to like, subscribe, and stay with us, because the next one might be closer to home than you think.